following program may contain traces of irony, sarcasm, satire, parody, mockery, banter, caricature, and nuts. The opinions expressed are almost certainly not shared by self-appointed officious dictatorial wowsers. If you are dangerously irony deficient or allergic to mockery of the self-important and corrupt, then get a life.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It is time for another episode of the Environmental as Anything show. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Sean O'Shannessy and very proud to live, work and play in the Bundjalung country. So thanks to our hosts, the Bundjalung people, the people of the Wijabul Wiabl region here around Lismore where I am today. So thanks for your hospitality and sorry for the mess that colonialism has imposed upon you and your country. And we respect elders past, present and emerging here at Environmental as Anything. Well, another big show lined up for you today. Of course, you're probably all in a bit of a lather, all very excited because, of course, tomorrow's that huge day on the calendar, that enormous annual event, National Tree Day. Now, you're probably getting out there and planting hundreds of trees and, you've probably been practicing for weeks now getting ready for this because, obviously, National Tree Day, one of the premier events on the national calendar. Anyway, what we're doing in response for National Tree Day here at Environmental as Anything, we've got a feature on trees, and particular our forests. What bigger repository of trees do we have, after all, than our actual native forests, where so many of our native species live, and where we which we rely upon for their water, for their climate stabilising effects. And for their recreational and spiritual importance to us all. So it's so valuable to us, trees, and of course we want to be able to continue to don't want to be caught up in not being able to see the forests for the trees here on Environmental as Anything. So we will be focusing on forests. In that vein, I will be talking to Sooty, who's Scott Daines, who's been in the news this week, helping to protect the gliders of the Styxx State Forest down in the mid-north coast of New South Wales, and talking to Scotty. Talking to Sooty about his efforts down there and across the state for the gliders and for the forests. He's been involved in an enormous amount of work on the citizen science front out there in the forest and holding the Forest Corps to account for their disgraceful mismanagement, their ongoing systematic vandalism of our public assets, and calling them out wherever he finds them. So we'll get Sooty on not too long from now. Also talking to us about forests issues is Al Oshlack. I spoke to Al yesterday, recorded an interview with him in which he talked about the outcome for the cherry tree forest, where we've been protecting those forests through legal action for the last couple of years. We just had an outcome in the cherry tree case that's been running for those last couple of years. Not a great outcome, but still some hope in that, and certainly some interest in the story. And then, of course, he also talked about the Southeast Forest Rescue case, which has gone before the Land and Environment Court, and which has set a new precedent in terms of community groups being able to have the right to take civil action against government agencies for their mismanagement when they are, deemed to be not following through on their requirements in our forests. It's now, according to this latest judgment, being made easier for community groups to actually hold the government to account and force them to obey the law. So that's got to be good for us all, and good news from Al Oshlack. And also talking about that very important local ecological issue, which is the North Lismore Plateau. You may have thought the North Lismore Plateau had been protected. Well, you were right, it was. But the profit takers and rent seekers who want to trash the plateau, who want to sell it off in tiny chunks for lots of money, have gone and appealed that decision to protect the plateau, and that is now before the courts as well. So Al gives us a great update on all of those important issues. Look, I'm going to play a quick snippet from the ABC Insiders. It's just a little intro blurb that they gave on the recent actions on the CFMEU. Now, just before I start playing that, it's the CFMEU is the Construction, Forestry, Mining and Energy Union. And so for a long time now, people in, of New South Wales and Australia have wondered, what is it that's going on in the ALP that they will not follow the science and the community and actually protect our life support systems and our stop exterminating our endangered species in our forests. What drives them? What motivates them? Why is the big question that has been on everybody's lips. Well, it's hard to know whether there's a causal link, but the CFMEU and the F in CFMEU is for forestry. Is the biggest donor to the ALP, or has been, up till very recently, when the ALP has now decided that it's going to reject and refuse donations from the CFMEU due to strong, credible allegations of gross misconduct, of criminal behaviour within that union, which are yet to be put before the courts, but which have been aired publicly widely through the media. So I'm just going to play this quick Insiders intro because it really does kind of summarise some of the issues. I'm going to have a quick comment after that, and then we'll launch straight into the Eco News.
Here, blue-collar workers, or at least some of their union leaders, have also been in focus for all the wrong reasons. The CFMEU is in crisis after damning new revelations of bikies infiltrating its ranks, threatening behaviour and cash kickbacks. It's created all sorts of headaches for Labor too.
Australia's most powerful building union, the CFMEU, is in damage control tonight after the Victorian branch was placed into administration today amid a swag of allegations.
I'll lose my job. I don't care. You're the next time you get fixed grouse.
Do you think this is systemic?
Well, it's certainly not fixed by John Sector leaving.
So there's no question that you've been ignoring allegations made against the CFMEU because you were fearful of the union's power and influence?
No, of course not.
They must be rooted out.
Do you accept responsibility?
I absolutely accept we need to take further strong action.
Allegations of criminal and corrupt conduct inside the CFMEU have spread from Victoria to other states.
Labor distancing itself from the embattled division of the CFMEU in New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania.
Suspend them from all parts of the New South Wales Labor Party, to not take affiliation or donations from that union.
Labor leaders are being shamed, accused of inaction against allegations of criminal infiltration, corruption and intimidation by the CFMEU.
As normally happens here, Premier Minns and Premier Malinauskas show the leadership that the Prime Minister can't demonstrate.
Labor's national executive has cut ties and blocked donations from the CFMEU's construction division as it tries to distance itself from the powerful union.
Sending in an independent administrator to clean up the CFMEU.
As there has been an escalation in the evidence, there has been an escalation in the government's response.
Prompting an extraordinary spray directed at the Prime Minister.
In a statement, the union's Queensland secretary said Albanese has panicked and soiled himself.
The weakest possible response from Anthony Albanese would be to appoint an administrator to the CFMEU.
The CFMEU needs to be deregistered, gone, finished, start again.
We will ensure that culture changes, and that's why the elements like John Sector have no place. Thanks very much.
So, some really strong action there taken by the ALP to basically eject the CFMEU from its ranks, to refuse donations from it, and to refuse it access to its national and state conferences around the country. Just in a bit of a background, the Builders Labourers Federation, the BLF, was an Australian trade union that was deregistered in 1986 after it was found to be engaged in there was a royal commission into corruption in the union, and the Federal Secretary Norm Gallagher was jailed for corrupt dealings. Now, people remember the name Norm Gallagher with some contempt and of course, but people also remember the great Jack Mundy, who was a campaigning BLF leader who basically introduced the word green into Australian politics. So the BLF had two extremes of its history. One was of being a fantastic campaigner for workers' rights and a strong campaigner for the protection of environmental assets, in introducing those green bans across Australia to protect heritage buildings and natural environments even. So there's a lot of history in the BLF, and then the CFMEU was constructed out of the pieces of various different unions, obviously cobbled together: construction, forestry, mining and energy union. It's been a few other unions in and out over the years, but that's what it has been most recently. Now, of course, we've had endless trouble with the CFMEU previously. I remember in the 90s when there was brutal thugs coming into our forests and threatening us, and under the banner of the CFMEU at the time. At that time, I think the leader of the CFMEU was Michael O'Connor. And Michael O'Connor was an interesting character. There's certainly questions raised about the behaviour of the union at various times when he was in power and since. And then, of course, this week, interestingly, in the light of all of this extreme public pressure to expunge all the influences of the CFMEU from the ALP, and probably unrelated to that, Michael O'Connor's brother Brendan, who was the Minister for Employment and Training, has quit. He's quit the cabinet. He's been shuffled out of the cabinet, and he's now declared that he is no longer going to be running for re-election in the next election. And he said that because he says he wants to spend more time with his family. So make of that what you will. I don't know if that's related to in any way to the rest of the story, but certainly an interesting sidebar. So for the forests, this could be a hopeful moment. Perhaps we could see the ALP finally sloughing off its slavish connection with the vandals who are out there in our forests destroying public assets and cashing in on turning our forests into wood chips and tomato steaks. So there may be a possibility that some of this is going to actually have some sort of positive impact. Of course, to the extent that it makes it more difficult for building workers to be properly represented, and that it means that their rights in the workplace are not honoured or respected, then of course that's a terrible thing. But my view is that if there is gross corruption of the sort which is alleged to have been going on, then that is more than anything else likely to be negatively impacting on the rights and safety of our precious building workers. So unions need to be honest and upright, just like the workers that they represent, and it seems that in this case we've got at least some exposure of a culture of malfeasance, and perhaps the possibility of cleaning out the stables and getting things organised so that our life support systems are no longer being thrown under the bus in the name of protecting a few dozen unsustainable, heavily subsidised jobs and their union representatives who back those jobs. So we'll see. Anyway. For the next story, where I've got lined up to speak to me on the phone, Scott Daines, better known to many of our listeners as Sooty. Scott is a renowned activist, citizen scientist and advocate for our endangered species and our forests. And we are very pleased to have him on the line to talk to us today about the what's going on with the rogue agency, the Forest Corporation, illegally logging the habitats of threatened species. Sooty, thanks for joining Environmental as Anything today.
Yeah, Sean. And happy National Tree Day to you.
Yes, indeed. I don't often sort of get terribly excited about these kinds of corporate events, but I think it's important that we don't lose sight of the forests for the trees. That's my theme for National Tree Day. And, of course, you never lose sight of the forest, mate. You're out there working your butt off, as they say, to protect them. And you've been in the Styxx River Forest just over the last week or so, actually lodging complaints against illegal logging in the habitats of threatened species. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, well, we've been... over the last, I suppose, year, getting out into forests and surveying for greater gliders, and we'll probably come back to that later on. But the one place we went to is Styxx River, and in December and January last year and this year, we identified a good bunch of dentrees, greater glider dentrees in the forest, and reported that to the EPA way back in January. And now for dentrees require a 50-metre radius exclusion zone around them. And so by reporting them to the EPA, they then forward the information to forestry, and they are meant to implement the exclusion zone. Now, a few weeks back, I just happened to be looking at the latest satellite pictures on my computer, and I thought, gee, it actually looks like they've logged where we found a bunch of dentrees. And we went out there, so I think when it was now, I think it was about the 7th of July, and sure enough, our sort of worst fears were came true, that indeed Forestry Corp had logged the exclusion zones of 9 of our dentrees, and in fact 2 of those, the actual dentree appears to have been taken out. It's not a good feeling when you think by reporting this, they're actually going to be protected, and yet, forestry is willfully logged. Now, for following that, we actually I put in a report to the EPA. Now, I've actually also got an email trail way back in January when I sent a report to the EPA about the dentrees. Received an email back from them saying, "Oh yes, we've informed forestry of the location of the dentrees," and then a subsequent email the next day saying, "Oh, can they actually pass on my actual report to forestry?" To which I said, "Yep, no worries." So, forestry cannot argue that they didn't know about the dentrees. They got our actual report and the actual locations from the EPA in January, and I think, judging by the satellite pictures, sometime in early April, is when they actually logged around the dentry area there. It's a blatant breach, and they need to have the book thrown at them totally.
So, the ABC article I've got in front of me here says a New South Wales government agency has racked up more than 1.1 million in penalties for more than a dozen instances of unlawful activity in fewer than 5 years, including 7 criminal convictions. It also faces 3 more criminal prosecutions that could result in up to 12 million in additional penalties if found guilty, and is under investigation for a further 18 potentially illegal actions. So there's this latest list that you're talking about of breaches that you've discovered. Is that on top of that list?
That will be on top of that list, and the sad thing is, Sean, that list is only a small fraction of the breaches that they do in the forest. Like, they get away with so much because the EPA is under-resourced, and also it's one government department taking another government department to court. And there's a lot of the time the EPA gives forestry a warning letter or, God forbid, an official caution, which is just a upmarket warning letter. And they also then get on-the-spot fines, and then it's prosecution. So, that's all those that you just read out are the prosecutions. It doesn't take into account the on-the-spot fines, the warning letters, official cautions, and then there's lots of stuff that don't even get that. The EPA just lets slide, sort of thing. So.
Yeah, so these are that's like, so what you're saying is that long litany of offences which have been found guilty of, and the ones that they have been charged with which have not been yet proceeded, only represents a small percentage, because, I mean, obviously it takes a lot of work for the community member like yourself, somebody who's not being paid, is not resourced by the government departments to do this, to get out there. You have to be pretty dedicated to get out there and do what you've done and find those den trees, don't you? Can you tell me, I mean, you've been at it for quite a while. Can we talk a bit more broadly about that process that you've been engaged with in looking for gliders and finding them?
Yeah, well, as I said, we started probably about a year ago, and we started in Talaganda State Forest down here and down on the south coast, and that came about by we did an action for the Bob Brown National Day of Action back in August last year. And we also noticed that they were logging in Talaganda, so we actually did a follow-up action there, and then noticed that in they were logging 5 compartments there, that they, on the harvest plans, there was only one den tree that forestry had found, and like Talaganda, it's a very high density area for greater gliders. So,
and yet they'd only found one.
Yes, in something like over 1,000, something like 1,500 hectares. They found one den tree. So we realised that their surveys were totally crap. And it's a report, again, was put into the EPA. It was actually by another person. The EPA has gone out and investigated and actually found a dead glider. So they've issued a stop work order on the operations. And because after following that, we thought, well, okay, let's get out and, find, have a look for den trees ourselves. And we went out on a Saturday, and within 15 minutes of the sun going down, we found 2 den trees straight up. And then following that, WWF and Wilderness Australia also did a bunch of surveys, and I went up as well for one of those nights, and we found another 25 or something den trees.
Right. So this is in a fairly short period of time, over a matter of a few weeks or months, is it, you're talking about?
That's 4 nights.
4 nights in a row.
Looking,
And so you found 25 den trees in 4 nights, where the agency whose responsibility is to find them had only found one.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And the EPA investigated, and they actually did their own surveys. I think they found about 20 den trees themselves.
Oh, good on you.
So it became obvious to us that forestry were failing in their obligations. That comes under what's called the broad area habitat search. They're meant to do that sort of ahead of logging, and that says that they're meant to identify and protect all den trees for not only greater gliders, for yellow belly gliders and squirrel gliders. Now, it sort of subsequently came out that Forestry were doing their broad area habitat searches during the day. Looking for a nocturnal animal during the day.
Right.
So that was sort of the reasoning for the EPA for their stop work, that they weren't doing the forestry or carrying out forestry operations in a competent manner. And you'd have to say it's totally incompetent to look for nocturnal species during the day.
But much more convenient. I mean, it's just a shame that the gliders didn't have the good sense and the just the common decency to pop their heads out and wave at them while they were doing their surveys. They would have, they could have fixed their own problems up for themselves, couldn't they?
They could have, So their argument was that it's a pretty poor argument, but that the rules are not a prescriptive set of rules. They're an outcomes-based rules, and but even so that fails because while it doesn't say they have to look at night, the outcome is to identify all dentries, which they were totally failing to do. So we followed up in another forest called Flat Rock in November, and again, the first night we went out there, we found a dentry, so we set up a blockade, and the following day the EPA issued another stop work order on that forest, and so Talagander ended up being having 4 40-day stop work orders,
right.
And Flat Rock had 2 40-day stop work orders, and that was until they sort of changed the rules in early February, and tried to they're trying to sort of override the requirements of the IFLA, of the broad area habitat searches, and they brought in what's called a site-specific biodiversity condition, which at first they actually were trying to not make them have to do surveys at all.
Right.
The environment movement sort of arced up against that, and they had a meeting with us on a Friday afternoon to say we're going to introduce these rules, and we went ballistic in the meeting, and they won't bring it in for another week, and then they actually put it off again for a following week and did consultation, and but even still, they reinstated the requirement to look, but they only have to look for every 100 hectares. They have to walk a 1 kilometre transect along a road.
Oh.
Now, if you can see 50 metres either side when you're doing that 1 kilometre transect, you will have looked at 10 hectares. So
right.
the survey is only required to look for 10 hectares in every 100 hectares, or 10%, or in fact less than 10%, because you don't actually see 50 metres all the time either side of the road.
No.
So, they're pretty... it's a bit of a farce, the survey requirements.
So the New South Wales government response to the New South Wales government agency illegally logging and failing to do proper surveys for an endangered species is to reduce the requirements to actually to survey for those species. That kind of fits in with the industry's line, doesn't it? Which is that that the problem isn't that the Forest Corps is a rogue agency that's not doing its job properly, but it's just that the community keeps complaining is the real problem, isn't it? They don't see their destruction of endangered species as being the problem. They see the fact that the community keeps arcing up about this is really the cause for the problem.
Which is again a ridiculous argument. We wouldn't be complaining if they actually followed the rules in the first place. And, like the original rules of the broad area habitat searches, they have to look over the entire net harvest area, so, compartments. So, as you said, they've reduced that now. And even when having reduced the survey requirement, they still got it wrong. And in late April, I found that well, one of the clauses for the new surveys was that each transect had to start within 1 hour of sunset, which is the optimum time you find gliders leaving the dens. Because
Right.
a dentary is only a dentary if they see a glider exit or enter a hollow. So it's no use seeing it, doing surveys later at night. The gliders are already out of their hollows, and so sure, you see a glider, but it's not a dentary.
So it's not enough to protect a tree to find a hollow in it. You can't just say, "Oh, look, that's a hollow-bearing tree. That's obviously going to be habitat for something. If not now, then in the future." It's not that those hollow-bearing trees don't gain any, immediate protection on their own right. You have to actually see a glider entering or leaving that hollow for it to gain protection.
Yes. That's correct, and no, they are required to leave hollow-bearing trees, but only 8 per hectare. So if there's more than 8, they can log, log tree 9, 10, 11, 12, whatever. So, which could be, a dentary, yes, but the fact that they haven't seen a glider, come out of the hollow, doesn't count the way they go. So it's bit of a joke. But as I said, so when I looked at their surveys, I found that they were starting the first transect within maybe the first one or two transects were within an hour of sunset, but then they were just carrying on doing transect after transect. Several nights they were, starting transects at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
These are times when, you will see gliders, but you won't find the dentary. So, again, they couldn't adhere to simple rules, and again, breach reports were put into the EPA, and they. I still actually don't believe this, but their excuse was they had a shared understanding with forestry that forestry could do what they were doing, which is totally against what the rules say. Like, there's no way that what they were doing corresponds with what's printed on the paper for the SSB site-specific biodiversity conditions. So, and then change the rules a third time, to make what they were doing legal. So now they can just do the first transect within half an hour of sunset, and then do transect after transect. I suppose the one small good bit of it, they've now brought in a 25-metre radius exclusion around a sighting of a glider. So for those later transects where they find a glider, it gets a 25-metre exclusion around the tree that it's in. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to pick up and protect the dentary that it came from.
Right.
So, it's still possible that'll go home to its den that night, and the next day loggers will chop it down.
Yes. So, look, again, from this ABC article, I'm looking at Graham Samuels, an expert in regulation, was the boss of the National Consumer Watchdog from 2003 to 2011 and recently conducted a review of Australia's federal environment laws. He said the ongoing breaches by Forestry Corporation, despite strong enforcement action by the EPA, suggested there was an ingrained culture of non-compliance at the logging agency. What do you think about the culture of the integrity of the logging agency of Forest Corps?
Well, yeah, they have no integrity, Sean. And as I said, they're a total rogue agency. They don't give a damn about threatened species, and they don't give a damn about the rules. They, there's many instances where the rules are pointed out to them, but they just go, no, we've done this all the time, and we're going to stick to it. We're not going to change.
No. So there's what seems to be like a disregard for legal procedures and community standards there. I at the beginning of the show was talking about the recent exposure of corrupt activity within the CFMEU. What relationship do you see, if any, between that kind of corruption in the union and the refusal of our governments to actually stand up against this kind of destructive activity?
It's an interesting way. Yeah, I mean, yes, they are. We actually do think a few people have said that this so-called shared understanding is possibly a form of corruption between the EPA and Forestry Corporation. Where there has been talk about how we potentially might send a complaint to ICAC over the whole situation or debacle that is forestry regulation in New South Wales.
Well, yeah, I mean, something needs to be done, doesn't it? I mean, you've already been taking action. You've had important success recently in the Southeast Forest Rescue case, which I've got Al Oshlack in the can, so to speak, ready to play an interview with him where he talks about this a bit. But can you just give us a quick summary of what the court case that recently gave the precedent for community groups to be able to take civil action under common law? But how did that go down?
Yeah, well, I suppose following the whole Talaganda thing last year, we hooked up with some lawyers and a barrister, Jonathan Corman from Victoria, who ran a lot of the Victorian cases. And as I said, we were pretty sure that they weren't. Not pretty sure that we're 100% sure that they weren't abiding by the requirements under the broad area habitat search to identify greater gliders. So in January, we launched a case in the Land Environment Court against Forestry Corporation about their failure for with the broad area habitat searches, and we initially tried to get an injunction on a bunch of areas that there were gliders. Known gliders were in the areas that they were logging, and unfortunately, the judge didn't allow our injunction, and in fact, straight up sort of dismissed our whole application on the basis that, we had a small win from her that she did agree that third parties could take forestry to court if they could show they had a special interest. But she said despite having over 20 odd years of doing forestry stuff, she didn't think we had a special enough interest. We actually appealed that decision and went in front of 3 judges at the Court of Appeal in about March or April, and then they gave their judgment in May, and 3 judges, all unanimous decision, overturned the Land Environment Court judge's decision, and they said that we actually did have a special interest, and also they upheld her ruling that third parties with a special interest can take forestry to court. So when we lodged the appeal, actually Forestry put in what's called a notice of contention. So they were sort of riding on the back of our appeal, I suppose, by saying that the Land Environment judge got it wrong when she said that third parties with a special interest could take them to court. So at this stage, after that, it was like four judges have said third parties can bring proceedings if they have a special interest. Now, forestry have applied for special leave to appeal to the High Court over that decision. I suppose they're saying all four judges got it wrong when they said that third parties can take forestry to court. So they've put in their paperwork, we've put in our paperwork. Sadly, the High Court has July off, so they won't get the paperwork until another week or so, and then we're presuming we'll get a decision in the beginning of September as to whether they will grant special leave to appeal. Now, our legal team's confident that they won't. Because as I said, like four judges have agreed that we can. There doesn't appear to anything special about the case that the High Court needs to wade into. But I suppose we will just have to ultimately wait and see what they think. But
well, that's a hopeful sign, isn't it? If the High Court does refuse that appeal and uphold that decision to allow community groups standing to take civil action, then that will have then been fully resolved to the highest level, won't it?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yes. Yeah. And as I said, we're confident that's what will happen. And then we go all the way back to the Land Environment Court where we were in January to hear the actual case.
Mate, it's an exhausting process, but like you are a man of indefatigable energy, and you have a team around you, I know, who are absolutely committed with such positive intellect and passion for this that it seems to me to be a cause for hope that you're carrying on. We need to wrap it pretty quick, but I wanted to come back before we do to the more immediate question of the Styxx River. And what you expect to happen there what you're hoping to happen next there?
Well, the EPA, I do know, were out in the field last week themselves, getting their own evidence, and it's pretty well cut and dried. Like as I said, forestry were told of the location of these dentries. They have definitely logged, within the exclusion zones. So it's now how fast the EPA can get a case up and running themselves. And, unfortunately, it does take them a lot of time. In some instances, it's taken up to 2 years for them to actually start execution. So I suppose we're hoping they'll be a little quicker on this, given the level of community interest and the degree of environmental harm that they've caused. It is a big case, and it needs to be acted on quickly.
Well, look, I guess we'll just have to get you to keep us posted on the progress on all of that. And look, thank you for everything that you've been doing. It's extraordinarily heroic and selfless, and it's much appreciated.
Yeah, my pleasure, Sean. Thanks for chatting with us.
No, anytime. Please keep us posted, as I say. We should. We'll leave that to another day, and good luck with all your endeavours.
Cheers, Sean.
No worries, Sooty. That was Scott Daines, also known as Sooty. Those of us who've been out in the forest protecting them will know Sooty as being one of the most reasonable and sensible chaps to be able to ever pull on his boots for our koalas and our gliders and the rest of our forest ecologies. And thank goodness Sooty and the team are out there doing that, because they would be, we would all be lost without them, and they would be lost without our support. So we should carry on giving them everything we can to make sure that progress can be made in the future. Okay, next on Environmental as Anything, I have Al Oshlack, who is well known in Bundjalung country as an advocate for social justice and the environment. And he's here to give us a bit of news on the legal front for some important issues that have been happening around our district and wider in New South Wales. Al, thanks for joining Environmental as Anything again.
Oh, thanks, Sean, for having me. It's been a bit of a time, but it's good to hear your voice.
Yep, it's great to be with you. And look, I understand that there's been some developments on the Cherry Tree Forest case. Now, I know that Cherry Tree Forest case has been ongoing for quite a while now, but we've just had a result.
Yes, well, it's good, but it's sad. It's not a good result. The case that we had against Forestry Commission, run by the applicant was David Mundine, a Western Bundjalung elder, and one of the lead applicants on their native title. He took forestry to court. We had an undertaking, so all logging had been stopped now for, I think Dawn might be able to help me with that. It's a bit of a time now, nearly 2 years.
Yeah, we have to be
not allowed to log there. And the case has went its way through court. There was a long period between the end of the case and to this judgment, but the judge said that in her case, apparently she had been not well for quite a while. So yes, so we got that result. The result was that our challenge to the logging was to the operation approval was that approval was not ecologically sustainable forest management, and that was something that was required by forestry. That was our case, and we had strong evidence. Actually, Dylan Hugh was our witness. He gave very strong evidence, and even David himself gave evidence about he went into the forest, and in earlier about 2017, I think 2016-17. There was a logging operation in one part of Cherry Tree, and where that logging operation was, it was just a total wall of lantana.
Yes, I've seen those sites.
You couldn't even walk in there. So anyway, he was challenging this other part, a number of Aboriginal sites, scarred trees in that forest, and other sites, and he wasn't consulted. No Aboriginal was actually consulted, although they had talked to the corporation that was the native title. But there is some a little bit dodgy in the fact that the officer of the corporation, the CEO, never discussed this with the traditional owners of the Western Bundjalung who were affected by this forestry operation. So the judge found that there's no requirement for ecological sustainability. It's not a requirement as such. It's not something that they had to consider when approving a forestry operation. So
really?
Yeah.
That seems extraordinary. I thought it was written into their harvest plan requirements, isn't it?
In the CFOA thing, the
CFIOA.
Yeah, it's written into there, and we're saying, well, it follows on that when they give an operation approval, that this would be a requirement for that approval to be ecologically sustainable. In the end, it sounds, well, we're not sure because the problem, that this followed another case by the North East Forest Alliance, which sort of was started after Cherry Tree and finished before Cherry Tree because this is the period when our judge was not well.
Yep.
So sad. It's a sad situation. And what makes it worse is that David, when we began this appeal, began this court action, was saying, well, if it goes against us, we're going to appeal. We will appeal it, because it has to go to a higher court. But it hasn't been turned out. David, he's an elder and he has some medical conditions, and part of it's a heart condition, and the stress of doing this type of litigation it seems to be too much. So at the moment, we've got 3 months to work out if we can appeal that decision, because we feel strongly that, when you say it, when I tell it to you, they can't log sustainably, not even improve. They can just virtually do what they like. So all these things that they do, which we say, how can they just pollute rivers and destroy habitat and cause, pollution and other, just biodiversity loss and cultural heritage impacts, things like that. And now it apparently turns out that they really don't have to do anything. So all the stuff that's being done, all the propaganda that forests are being looked after in any way, has been paid for. It's been put to pay.
Put to pay. So this court case basically is saying it's not ecologically sustainable, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's ecologically sustainable or not.
We don't even have to. It don't even go that far. We don't even have to see if it's ecologically sustainable.
We don't even have to ask the question.
Yeah.
That's appalling, isn't it? Now, of course, that's grossly in breach of community standards. But the real question at the end of the day in the courts is it in breach of the legislation? And that's, I guess, what you'd want to be taking on appeal, isn't it? But anyway, I guess I must say, if David is unwell, that's very sad to hear that his health's not holding up under the strain, and I hope he's able to recover fully from all of this.
He's had he's had long-term medical problems because they're from Wijabul, so they're more affected by the asbestos, things like that. So it's a legacy that's been another legacy of just sort of what's happened with the
colonialism.
Yeah, Dave Mundine.
Yes,
he's a hero. He's a legend. He's done litigation for nearly over 25, 26 years. And him and Andrew Donnelly did about, I think, I don't know, about maybe 9 or 10 different litigations and stopped the Timbara gold mine going ahead.
Wow.
Which that was started. And it was a massive litigation.
Yeah.
He was also the lead advocate in the Western Bundjalung native title. And he did that for, again, nearly 20 years till they got the native title. So, it's just sort of this end game now. And it's sort of really unfair that, he has to take such a litigation when the whole forestry thing is just the biggest scam. Even if you're a conservative, neoliberal, it's still rubbish, because it's losing so much money, like millions and millions of dollars and more millions of dollars we don't even know about. It's just been funneled through this forestry corporation through their losses and what they're doing. And it takes, people like Dave Mundine. And the reason he took this particular case was following the arrest of Cherry Tree, where an elderly woman was injured and other people were getting, pushed around and all this by forestry thugs and police and other things. So he didn't do it for himself. He did it for the community, not just for the Aboriginal community, but for all the people helping to save the environment. To me, he's a legend. I love him.
That is heroic. That is heroic.
And you don't, he doesn't go out front. He never does TV. Can't ever get him on the radio. But he's always there, and he's always thinking and feeling for the community, his own community, and for all of us.
Yeah.
And I love him for that.
That's amazing, yeah. Look, Al, there's so much to talk about. We still haven't touched on the Southeast Forest
Before I get to that, there is one more thing about Cherry Tree. There's no cost. No costs were awarded against David, even though he didn't win. And the forestry agreed to no orders for costs on the very second day. And the judge also said that she wasn't going towards granting costs, which is a normal event in these types of cases.
Yeah, right.
So that's one positive we can take.
That's great. So there's all right. So there's big stuff afoot in the courts for the forests across the state, and Cherry Tree is just one of those. Of course, there's also this the Southeast Forest Rescue have just had a case which you're saying is quite groundbreaking. Can you explain?
Yeah. Both Cherry Tree, although it was groundbreaking, and followed by NEPA's case and other cases, it allowed at least the court, against all forestry wishes, to be able to review any forestry decision. You've got like a judicial review. So You know, they have established that. Now, that's a very important thing, and the judge did mention it in the cherry tree case. The Southeast Forest case, Southeast Forest Rescue, went almost one step further, but by accident. They had the same judge as the NEPA case in a. I'm not quite sure of the whole case. There was a number of forests involved, but the judge wouldn't give Southeast Forest Rescue standing, so they couldn't take the case. And that got appealed to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal came back. Not only did they say that Southeast Forest Rescue had standing, they said that they had standing in such a way that they could apply the common law to force forestry to comply.
Right.
Now, we've never had this before. You know, every time before, it's always been led down down the path of where forestry and the government argue the only people who can take forestry to court is the EPA, the Environmental Protection Authority.
Right. So now the other government agency.
yeah, can take forestry to court. And in such a way, they can take both civil and criminal proceedings. But the EPA never did civil proceedings. They only did criminal proceedings. Now, they have caught forestry out on quite a few occasions. It's pretty easy. Forestry can't help themselves because, you know, through their vandalism, you know, and through their arrogance, you know, breaches. But the EPA comes in, you make a complaint or they find a complaint, and then they will prosecute the forestry. But the problem is the damage is already done. It's a sort of an after-the-fact sort of situation.
Yeah, they never jump in and try and stop the work before it gets to damaging, do they? And I also think that from what you're saying is there's a big difference, isn't there, between the standards of proof for a criminal case, which is the kind of thing that the EPA has been doing, following up after the fact, and the standards of proof for a civil case. They're quite different, aren't they?
For a criminal case, it's like a thing called beyond reasonable doubt.
Yep.
Which is a fairly high bar. And in civil cases, it's on the balance of probabilities. So to give an example, just say a cherry tree, you know, the forestry go crashing through this creek line, just totally smashed it up, and vegetation around it, polluted the waters, and did all that. And then the Northeast Forest Alliance people came and saw what had happened, made the complaint to the EPA. So the EPA comes out and investigates and and obviously there's damage and all this. Refused to prosecute because they felt it wasn't beyond reasonable doubt that it was forestry that did it. If it was a civil thing, it would be no doubt.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's pretty well known. It would be on the probability. But, you know, they wouldn't even prosecute. But actually, if they could have prosecuted, it would have been very difficult for me, I think, for forestry to prove it wasn't them, it was someone else. That type of defence. So that's what we're putting up with. So in the Southeast Forest Rescue case, so they went this one step further by saying, well, a person who has an active interest, you know, or an organisation, such as Southeast Forest Rescue, or I suppose NEPA or the Australian Conservation Foundation, persons of interest like Aboriginal traditional owners, you know, active environmentalists, are able under the common law to actually, if they have an active interest, to prosecute a case, a civil case.
Yep.
And so when you prosecute a civil case, you can, the other advantage of civil, that you can stop an apprehended breach. Like the forestry's there with their bulldozer and they've got an approval plan, they're going to say, oh, we're going to knock all this down. They say, yeah, but if you knock this down, you're going to knock down a tree which contains gliders, which is the Southeast Forest. You'll knock down these trees with gliders, and you haven't even done the survey which you're required to do. So we're allowed to go to the court and go, court, you should grant us an injunction to stop forestry making this breach.
Right. So this is actually now being firmly established by this appeal from the Southeast Forest Rescue.
Yeah. So much so, the forestry have appealed it to the High Court.
Oh.
They're appealing the Court of Appeal decision to the High Court because they are, you know, it hasn't really sunk into our environmentalist consciousness what this is all about in that way. But forestry knows the danger of this.
Right.
At the time they can do a breach, if you're an active or are able to establish some standing, you can get injunctions, all sorts of types of things. So, so that's a really important case. Because it's been like over the last, say, 3 or 4 years, we've been mounting a whole chain of litigations, because it seems like at the moment, seems like, the only way we could stop them, to stop at least some of the incredible damage that's being done, and also it assists those people who do direct action. In a case where direct action, people are arrested or whatever, or whether you can get injunctions. So, like a cherry tree, there was injunctions which stop people risking their lives. Plus, they're getting criminal records and all this type of thing.
Yep, and injuries.
And so the civil, this plays a really important part in trying to stop them, because if, of course, it's happened at Timbar and Iron Gates, a lot of other cases where a development or whatever is, or forestry operation is found to be in breach, then the criminal cases always get dropped against protesters.
Yep.
So, and I think that's what happened to Timbar. That was about, 70 or 80 arrests. I think only about a handful of them, of those who just pleaded guilty, were actually found to be guilty.
Yes, that seems to be an increasing pattern where the forestry is considerably more at risk of being found guilty of their behaviours than it is the community who are trying to oppose them who are found guilty. Yeah. So, that, obviously the judicial system working at least on that level where judicial review and independence is the resort which we can go to find some justice. Al, look, we've only got a few minutes left before we have to wrap it up, and we've got the very important and very large issue of the North Lismore Plateau to touch on yet.
It's our very local issue.
Yes, indeed. So tell us what's going on. I understand there's developments.
It's a long saga, but reached the end where a developer, a group of developers have requested they want to build 700, it goes up and down, but it's about 730 lots. Plus 2 super lots, which is another 500 to 600 lots.
Right.
So it's quite big. It's bigger than any development. I try to tell people what it's like. Maybe 10 times bigger than Wallam, or it's about 6 or 7 times bigger than Iron Gates, or whatever. It's huge, and it's massive, and a lot of bulk earthworks and things. The planning panel. Went to the planning panel because it's so big, the council couldn't make the decision. The planning panel just totally rejected it, saying it's damaged the traffic, the flooding, the water, landslides, and cultural heritage, and the ecology, the biodiversity were all major issues to the planning panel in rejecting it. The developer then appealed this decision. And that is now being heard in the court. Starts on August the 12th. First day is on site, and I think it's open to the public.
Yep.
On the 12th, and the rest of the week is going to be held in Sydney at the Land Environment Court. Now, when we got onto this is all going down, because we thought it was all over once the planning panel had rejected it. We found out that actually the appeal was on. In these types of cases, the council defends the planning panel decision.
Yep.
So, they make the decision, the council does it. And when we got hold of what the council was up to, we found out that they were not defending the cultural heritage issue.
Right.
To the court. And they were sort of trying to, it looks like they're trying to compromise by getting sort of like, here are the conditions we'd like the development to have. So we've got a barrister, and Mickey Ryan, who's been a stalwart for this case, has joined as another party, and there was an application before the court, and the developer objected, didn't want the Aboriginal person, the traditional owner, to have any say, but the court overrode the developer, and Mickey Ryan has now joined, And now he has obtained affidavits from 2 senior traditional owners, knowledge holders about the plateau and his own knowledge. And we haven't got archaeologists or anything, but they're standing up on their own. And a barrister has come on board from one of the top chambers in Sydney.
Great.
And he is telling the court that this issue, the cultural heritage, is determinative, meaning that whatever all the other stuff is, the traffic and all that, which are pretty horrendous,
pretty significant,
and all that. But I mean, if you say yes to it, you are going to cause irretrievable damage to this very particular sacred and significant Aboriginal site. Now, what happened during this period, just prior to this, that the developer got an archaeologist firm called Everett who did almost a fake consultation in which they never talked to any elder or any, and the only comment they had that we could find is that a couple of the people what they did is they did trenching. They dug these test pits, they're called, test pits, and they dug out the test pits, and with that soil, it only went down like 500 millimetres, and a 500 millimetre square, they made about 11 square metres of these test pits. Now, 21 artefacts came out of those test pits.
Wow.
And then they said, well, that's not very much, just isolated artefacts and scatters. And anyway, we said, well, wait a minute, what you haven't put in your thing, if there's 21 artefacts in 11 square metres, and the development is 770,000 square metres,
good Lord.
You're talking over 1 million artefacts. 1.5 million artefacts are under that ground. And there's no way you'd be able to pick them all up and analyse them and take them to storage and all that. It was just, and so we are saying that it's determined. You do this, you will destroy this. There's so much evidence. No, they're not the only things on the site. And our other evidence says all types of camps and features on the site, which all be impacted. But this is the sort of fight we're making determined. It's either one or the other, court. If you go to destroy your site, it's on you. No, you're going to cause irretrievable damage. Damage that can't be coped back. It'll be a really very sad day for Lismore.
Well, it sounds like there's a very strong case to answer. It sounds like the desperation of the developers to cash in on this site is pushing them to appeal against something which looks like a very strong case against them. So we'll be very interested to hear what happens on the 12th and afterwards. Al, I hope you'll be able to keep us posted.
Well, I reckon Sean, you should come down with one of your mobile tape recorders.
I will.
And be seen.
I will come along. That sounds...
I think we're all invited because one of the traditional owners told me he's going to put a big smoking welcoming ceremony.
Yep.
On the plateau, and so we're going to have an all-star cast.
Great. All right. Well, hopefully we'll get a few listeners along, and that'll be fun. It'll be a good day out.
Yeah. All right. Thanks very much, Sean, for having me.
Not at all, Al.
I wish you really well and good health, and for your family.
Thank you.
And for all our listeners.
And to you too.
Stay strong and keep well. God bless you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yep. That was Al Oshlack, the Bundjalung region's renowned advocate for social justice and environmental sustainability, working with the law and with the community and keeping us informed about what's going on there for some big issues. Thanks for tuning in to Environmental as Anything today.
We have heard today how planting more trees can help individuals as well as their communities. But here in Australia, a country with a vast area of forests, how is the struggle going between native tree logging and civil protests to save the trees? Environment as Anything is a podcast and community radio show where this struggle is discussed and the importance of our native forests is stressed. Recent government actions have varied, with some areas imposing restrictions, while others continue to permit logging, creating a complex and evolving situation. I spoke with producer and presenter of Environmental as Anything, Sean O'Shaughnessy, about the current state of the native forest logging in Australia.
Well, certainly over the last couple of years, there's been quite a lot of progress made in regard to the native forest logging. There's in New South Wales and Tasmania, they're full steam ahead with continuing to log the native forests there. But in both Victoria and Western Australia, in the last couple of years, they have declared an end to native forest logging in both of those states. So there's some really significant breakthroughs there around the country in some places where quite a lot of damage was being done to native forests previously. They're now protected.
And what are some of the environmental impacts of the current native forest logging?
I mean, native forest logging does enormous damage to the forest where it's practiced. The damage to habitat for endangered species. I mean, the koala has been declared a nationally endangered species now and is also declared endangered in New South Wales. So, koala populations have plummeted across, particularly in New South Wales, for over the last decades, and also the population of greater gliders is another significant species which is endangered. But there's like about 175 different species which are plants and animals which are threatened by native forest logging. I mean, native forest logging damages forests not only for habitat values for, furry critters. It's also massively damaging to the carbon sinks that those forests represent. There's just a huge amount of carbon which is emitted through the process of logging, and then there's a huge amount of reduction in the capacity of those forests to actually store carbon when they are converted from intact older forests into open regrowth forests. So contrary to the industry propaganda, which is to say that somehow regrowth forests absorb more carbon, it's actually older trees that are more efficient carbon sinks.
And how have protest movements against native forest logging evolved over the years? And what are the main, demands of these movements?
Well, the protest movement is wide and varied against native forest logging. The community is massively supportive of an end to native forest logging. When people find out that our native forests are still being logged, their general response is to be appalled. And so people are willing to do all sorts of things to protest, from writing a letter to their local member, or signing a petition, or something as simple as that, to going and taking part in street rallies or other kinds of more direct action in the forest type of activity. So there's a long history of that kind of action being successful here in Australia. Australia's got a proud history of pioneering the protection of forests and using direct action for that. From those first logging protests in Terania Creek here on the north coast, where I'm based in Bundjalung country, they were some of the first in the world to actually use direct action tactics to blockade those forests. But those are kind of the pointy end of the spectrum when it comes to protest. There's a lot of things that people get up to as far as getting out there and doing, and they have had a very positive effect in terms of bringing these issues to the attention of the general public. One of the problems for our forests is that they are so far from where most people live. It's very difficult for most people to know what's going on in those forests, and it's only through seeing it in the news or hearing about it by other, word of mouth, through having had some kind of direct action of that sort, that brings it to people's attention. Legal action is the most important action for forests. We talked earlier about protest action. Protest action gains attention for forests, but legal action and political action, the ones that change the laws and the ones that actually enforce the laws, those are the ones that actually make a difference in the forest at the end of the day. If we want to see our forests protected, we need to do so by ensuring that our current laws are powerful enough to protect them and that they are properly enforced to protect them. That's the way of doing something within a civil society, is to do so through the laws, through using the laws of the land to protect the values of the community. And that's, without a doubt, the most powerful thing that can happen for our forests.
That was producer and presenter of Environmental as Anything, Sean O'Shaughnessy, speaking to The Wire.
And yes, and here I am again. I hope it's not too self-indulgent to play an interview I did yesterday with The Wire, but I thought it was not a bad way to finish up our special program on National Tree Day, which is coming up tomorrow. So, yes, I thought we should make sure that we don't lose sight of the forest for the Tree Day. And hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you've found it entertaining and informative. I've just about wrapped up the show right now. We've only got a few minutes left to go. So before we go for another week, I wanted to share with you a couple of events that are coming up. One that is tonight. I mentioned it earlier. Some people might have already heard that Vanessa Eakins' 20 years in council is being celebrated tonight at the Serpentine Gallery at 104 Conway Street, Lismore. That's kicking off in just over half an hour at 5:30 at 5:30 at the Serpentine Gallery there in Conway Street, Lismore. So come along, join in from 5:30 till 9:30. There'll be food, there'll be drinks, there'll be laughter, special guests, great music, fun. It'll be a great a celebration of a wonderful contribution from a real community campaigner and one of the workhorses of the protection of our environment and the support for our community here in Lismore, Vanessa Eakins, also well known as a presenter here on River FM. So come along. And also there is next week, in 1 week's time, I mentioned earlier, there's the koala film, the koala documentary, which we heard the producer speaking earlier in the show, 3 p.m, Saturday, 3rd of August, Starcourt Theatre. Come along and see the koalas. It's a very uplifting and informative documentary. So there'll be a Fridays for Forest stall in the foyer with info about local forests and actions you can take to help. And Friends of the Koala will also be there with an info stall. So, lots of information there for people who want to get involved in helping to save our koalas. Look, we are so close to the end of the show. I must say goodbye. Thank you very much for being with me. And I'm Sean O'Shaughnessy. I'll be back next week for another 3 hours of Environmental as Anything. Please join me then. Check out the podcast in the meantime. Share it with your friends. Let them know that we're around. And tell me if there's any issues or events that I've not shared with the world that I should. I'd love to do so.